All right, the headache rack is now completed. This is the bottom driver's side corner of the headache rack. And one last thing we need to do before we actually weld the headache rack to the bed. This is the driver's side front corner of the bed up here. And we need to cut a 1 3/4 inch square right here. And the reason for this is our wiring from our cab lights is going to come down and poke through here and then come out this inside hole that we cut early on. So the way that this is positioned is this hole is 1 inch from the outside to the side, and then 1/2 inch from the front. So 1 3/4 inch square, 1 inch from the outside, 1/2 inch from the front. We're going to need to cut that on both sides, so when we tip this headache rack up, it's going to be underneath. So we're not going to see this at all. So I'm just going to use my cutting wheel, but go ahead and do that this side and the passenger side, and then we'll be ready to weld on the headache rack. A hole just like that. Make sure you do that on the other side. If you got big overlap lines from cutting, you can weld those up, but more than likely it's not going to matter. So I'm not going to worry about them, but you can if you want. So do that, then we'll move on to welding the headache rack on. All right, so I've got the headache rack set up here on the bed. This is the front driver's side corner of the bed. We just got done cutting some holes in the top of this. So there is a square hole directly underneath this tube on this side as well as the other side. Those are our wiring light holes so that we can poke wire on the inside of this tube through the outer frame tube and then out this hole that we cut on the front and side in the beginning of the course. So a couple of things to note here before you start welding this thing on is you need to make sure that your rack is facing the proper direction. You don't want to have the back side on this side. You want to make sure that your show side is towards your tail. The way you're going to know that that is happening is this cross member here is going to be flush with the front side of your outer frame of your headache rack. So once you have it turned the correct direction, the next thing we're going to do is make sure that the non-show side of your rack is flush with the front side of your bed here. So I just have a magnet here and I've stuck the magnet to the front, and then I've pressed this face here tied against the magnet to ensure that this face and the front of this face are flush. So you need to do that, and then once you have that done, you need to slightly tap it back and forth to make sure it's centered horizontally on the bed. So if you measure the distance between the outside here and where this intersects with it, it should be the same distance as the other side, just to make sure it's centered side to side. So once you have those two things done, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tack weld this, and we're going to use the gusset to tack weld this up. Reason being is this gusset is machine made, meaning it's a perfect 90-degree angle. So we're going to use this to make sure that our rack is square front to back. So what I like to do is set it like so, and as far as how far inset you want this, some people like it flush and then you fill this gap, but I like it a little bit inset so I have a nice corner weld to fill here. But whatever you want to do, it's up to you. So the first thing I do is just get this nice and tight against the rack, and then I tack weld here and then here, but not on the rack. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So once you have a tack weld in these two corners, notice I didn't weld anything on this tube, and I can kind of still move it back and forth, but I'm going to use this as a square. So I have a slight gap up at the top here. There's a little more daylight poking through this crack up here than down here, meaning my rack needs to rotate back just a little bit. So I'm going to use this as a square, pull the rack back just a little bit, make sure that this is parallel. You know, you don't want it way back here or way up here. You want to have the same amount of tube poking out the entire way up the gusset. So I'm just going to pull this back with my hand into square and then throw a quick tack weld. So once you have it tack welded up in 3 positions, it means that your rack should be square. You can go ahead and throw a tack on the front corners here. and make sure you do that on the other side before you solid weld this. But once you get it tack welded on both sides, you're gonna solid weld the whole seam down here, and then this whole seam, and then all the way around this whole tube. You don't need to solid weld the back side of this gusset right here, but definitely the front side and then all the way around the tube. After you get that done, we can move on to putting the diamond plate on. So as you can see here, guys, we got the headache rack done. It is solid welded with the gussets and everything up at the front. The next thing we're going to do is cut our piece of diamond plate, which is going to fill this area right here all the way across. So refer to your blueprint. It's going to be the section titled cut list for your headache rack. And what we're going to be making right now is piece E, which should be made out of 14 gauge diamond plate. So I got mine right here. It should be 16 inches wide, probably going to be 8 feet long. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cut it so that we have two 15-degree sides or angles at each end, and it's going to make a trapezoid that's going to fit perfectly up there in that space. So refer to your blueprint. Most models are probably going to be 80 1/4 inches on the long bottom side and 71 and about 5/8 on the top side. Refer to your blueprint just to make sure, but in most cases those are going to be the measurements. So a couple ways that we can draw this line. So I just draw the first line, start right at the corner and cut it off, and then measure the other side off of these two corners. So so what we're going to do here is there's a couple ways to draw this. This needs to be a 15-degree angle because that matches the pitch of the headache rack up there. So a couple ways to do this. First way is just with your speed square. Just use your speed square to do a 15-degree angle. Just draw it right through this bottom corner, and then finish your line off with either a straight edge or a yardstick, whatever. The second way, which is going to be a little more exact and what I would recommend, only will work if your width of your piece E is 16 inches. So make sure you get your piece 16 inches on the dot. But if it is 16 inches wide, the best way to get a perfect 15-degree angle is start with a mark right at your corner, and then measure in from the top corner 4 5/16. So from this edge to this line where it intersects with the top is 4 5/16 inches, and then draw a line through your corner to this mark, and that's going to make a perfect 15-degree angle. So get this line drawn here, and then we're going to move the camera and just show you the other side, how to get the other side your perfect length and angle. Alright, so we move the camera, we're now on the other end. Down there at that end is where we just drew our other line, and it's going to be at this angle down there. So this line that we're going to draw, mine's already drawn. You need to make sure it's at the opposite angle, so we make a trapezoid, not a parallelogram. But the way we're going to do this is refer to your blueprint, the piece E on your cut list for your headache rack. So the bottom side is probably going to be 80 1/4 inches. So the way you do this is you just measure from the bottom corner down there, and then just make a mark at 80 1/4 inches on this bottom edge, and then you measure from the top edge, the top corner, and measure to 75 15/16. And as you notice, that's the same discrepancy in length. This 75 15/16 is 4 5/16 shorter than 80 1/4, and that makes this angle a perfect 15-degree angle, obviously just opposite the other one. So that's how you do that, and then we're just going to slitter disc both of these lines, this one here and that one down there, and then we will get to mounting it on the headache rack. Alright, so I've got the diamond plate cut, and I flipped it over so the diamonds are up, and I have it laid on the bed the way that it's going to go on the headache rack. So you should do the same. So the next thing we're going to do is on the bottom outside corners, we need to grind a little notch, and it needs to be 1/4 inch up from the bottom, and it needs to go 1 1/4 inches from the outside corner. So it's just going to be a little notch that we cut out of the corner. This is so when we put our diamond plate up against our headache rack, there's going to be a weld right here that goes around the outside of the bottom part of the tube. So we just grind out this little notch so that it doesn't hang up on that and goes flush against the headache rack. So again, just a little notch. As you can see, I got mine drawn here. It's a 1/4 inch in from the bottom, and it is 1 1/4 inch long from the outside corner. And I just use my grinder with my flapper disc and just kind of grind it out until I grind out the part that's drawn out here. So just do that. You're going to want to do it on the other side as well. And then we will slap this up there and we'll show you how to tack weld that on. Alright, so I got the diamond plate up here on the headache rack. Make sure it's centered side to side. Just basically measure from the inside edge of your gusset to the outside edge of your diamond plate. Make sure that measurement's equal on both sides, and then clamp the 2 top corners with vice grips. And then I'm going to turn this thing around and show you how to tack weld it on so that it gets a perfectly flat surface. Alright, so I got the bed rotated around. This is the front side of the bed. This side's going to be towards the cab. We got our diamond plate clamped up against the headache rack with our 2 clamps at these top upper corners. So the first thing you're going to need to do is build yourself, this is what I call a spacing jig. So you should have some 2.5 inch tube left over. You just need like a 3-4 inch piece of that. And then any piece of flat bar, whatever that you have left over, you probably will have some 3/16 by 2 left over. And what I did here is I just welded this piece of flat bar against my 2.5 inch tube. And what we're going to use this for is we're just going to run this along here. And then this is just going to make sure our diamond plate is the proper and the same distance from the front side of this. So as you can see, I already got 2 tack welds, so I just put this up against here and then reached through the rack and pushed the diamond plate tight against this tube, and then I tack welded. So that just ensures that you get the same spacing the entire length of it. So do this and make 2 tack welds on either side of center, but before you tack weld the rest, we're actually going to weld a support piece in here. So you should have some 1 3/4 inch square tubing left. And again, this is after you've already built your spacer jig and you've put 2 tack welds about 6 inches off each side of center. Just take the measurement from the top of this tube to the bottom of this cross member here. Mine is 15.5. Yours should be somewhere in that neighborhood. But whatever the measurement is from here to here at the center, cut yourself a 1 3/4 inch piece of tube. You'll need 1 of them. And then we're just going to weld this in right at the center. So it should be a flush junction here. This is 1 3/4 inch tube as well. Flush junction here, and then just tight against your diamond plate. It should be already at the proper spacing back from the front face because we use our spacer jig. So get this thing in here and weld this up solid around all the edges, and then I will go over how to systematically tack weld this on so you get all the wrinkles out of it and a nice consistent flat face on the show side. I got this center support solid welded in here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to systematically tack weld this thing on. So basically you just need to reach around and push wherever you're welding. We're just going to throw several tack welds around all the edges here, and then we'll come back and solid weld it once we have it tack welded on. So wherever you're tack welding, you just need to be pushing firmly against the diamond plate on the back side so that it's tight against this whole headache rack. So I'm going to start down here. I'm pushing on the back side here opposite of where I'm welding. Don't burn your hand. You might get a thicker glove. But we're going to go up the side, across the top, down here, up here, across the top, down here, and then we'll use our spacer jig to tack weld the bottom seams at the end. After that, you basically just put like a 3-inch stitch weld at every one of your tack welds, and then it'll be solid welded on. So we're just going to fast mow this, and you'll get the picture. So the next thing we're going to do is just use our spacer jig that we've made. Make sure that it's tight against the front side here with your lip, and then that your diamond plate is tight against your jig on the back side, and we'll just tack weld across the whole bottom. And then after that, we'll just, wherever we have a tack weld, you just extend that weld to like a 1 to 2 inch stitch weld all the way around, and it'll be solid welded on.